good to be with you today. It's a cloudy day here in Georgia as well, but we'll just make the best of it and enjoy ourselves. Good to have Brother Bill back. He was sick last week, and I know he's excited to be back teaching. And so we're just going to get started. We'll open in prayer and then just turn it over to Bill. Lord, thank you for allowing us to meet today through technology. I thank you for being able to be with our people. And Lord, I ask that you will open our minds and hearts as we sit and listen to Brother Goins as he teaches upon why we use the King James Bible. What a great lesson it's been thus far, and I pray that you'll just keep using him and blessing him. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Bill?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so that you can see some PowerPoint stuff. Everybody see that okay? Brother Preston, that showing up? Yep. Okay, good. All right. Now we've talked a little bit already about the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus manuscripts, and a little bit when we talked about the history of these things. But I wanted to go into just a little bit more detail today about these two manuscripts and how they really are the foundation for the influence of the modern translations and the differences between them and the King James. The first thing I wanted to touch on was what we call in biblical studies, hermeneutics, a law of first mention. The law of first mentions. Now, this doesn't mean that this is a dead set law, but generally speaking, the way God refers to something in the first instance within the Bible is the same way that He refers to it all throughout the Bible. And so we wanted to take a look at these two locations in which the manuscripts come from. Obviously, the Alexandrian manuscripts come from Alexandria, Egypt, and that's primarily the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus manuscripts and a few others. And then the majority texts of the New Testament manuscripts that are the foundation of the King James Bible come from Antioch, which is out of Syria. And so we wanted to see what the Bible has to say about these locations, because like I say, this is the law of first mentions. Genesis chapter number 12, verses 10 through 12. And there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down into Egypt to sojourn there. For the famine was grievous in the land, and it came to pass when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. So the very first time the word Egypt, the name Egypt, the place Egypt is mentioned in the Bible, it's mentioned in a negative context. It's a place where, if you go down there, they might kill you and take your wife. That's not a good place. That's not a positive context at all. And as you know, throughout the rest of Scripture, Egypt is looked at as a type of the world. It's where they were in bondage. It's throughout the whole of Scriptures. Egypt is looked at as in a negative context. In fact, that's pretty much about the best thing that you can get from Egypt is how not to live. But let's take a look at Alexandria. Alexandria is the name of the city within Egypt, or the place within Egypt where these manuscripts come from. And the first mention of Alexandria is in Acts chapter 6, verse 9. Then there arose certain of the synagogue, which is called the synagogue of Libertines, and the Cyrenians and Egyptians, and them of Cilicia and of Asia, disputing with Stephen. Now, Stephen, of course, a little bit later on here, he gets stoned to death. And some of the people that are disputing with him are from Alexandria. So the first time the city of Alexandria is mentioned in the Scriptures, it has a negative context. These are people who are going to stone Stephen to death. So that's obviously a negative context. And then also, from there forward, each time the word Alexandria is mentioned, it's not in a positive context. You can check that out. So let's take a look at the other side. What about the places where the manuscripts come from that outline our King James Bible? In Jude 10:6, here's one of the things that people in the past, when we've taught this particular part of the lesson about the law of first mentions, someone brought this up one time and said, this doesn't fit. See, the Syria is not a good context. So let's read it. Jude 10:6. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam and Ashtaroth and the gods of Syria. and the gods of Zidon, and the gods of Moab, and the gods of the children of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the Lord and served him not. So the first mention of Syria is a negative context, but that's not really the first mention of Syria, you see. So what happened here is somebody pulled this verse, and it is the first time the word Syria is used. But see, sometimes in these Bible programs, if you search for something and you try to find the first time it's mentioned, you don't realize that sometimes that word is mentioned in a different tense. So let's look at the actual first time. This is in Jude. Let's look at the actual first time that Syria is used. It's in Genesis 25:20. And instead of using the word Syria, it uses the word Syrian. And therefore, that's the first mention. So here in this case, Genesis 25:20, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to his wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padanaram, the sister to Laban, the Syrian, Genesis 28:5. And Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went to that place unto Laban, son of Bethuel, the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. So the first time Syria is actually mentioned, not using the word Syria, but the word Syrian, which is just another tense of the same word, is to say that that's the place where Isaac got his promised wife. So that isn't positive context. It's not a negative context, that's for sure. But that was something that Syria is not as much of an issue. But take a look at the first time that Antioch is mentioned in Acts chapter 6, verse 5. And the saying pleased the whole multitude, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith of the Holy Ghost, and Philip and Prochorus and Nicanor and Timon and Parmenas and Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch. So the first time that Antioch is mentioned, the city in which the majority text of the manuscripts come from, it's mentioned in a positive context because that's the place where the first deacons were chosen in the New Testament church. And so this actually bears out throughout the whole of Scripture. Anytime that the word Egypt is mentioned, it's in a negative context. Look at Deuteronomy 17:16. But he shall not, this is talking about the king, saying Solomon shouldn't do this, but he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to the end that they should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. So God is saying, don't even get horses from Egypt. Don't even go there to get horses. Now, why would we want to get our manuscripts that backs up our Bibles from Egypt if you're not even supposed to get horses from there? And then of course, looking at another mention of Antioch, Acts 11:26. And when he had found him, he brought unto him Antioch, and it came to pass that a whole year they assembled themselves with the church and taught much people, and the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. So even what we call ourselves Christians comes from Antioch. So all throughout the Bible, Egypt is bad and Antioch is good, and so that pretty much shows us what God thinks about in general about those two locations. And so now we're going to look at, because of these manuscripts that we get from Alexandria, we've mentioned several times about how that many things are left out of the modern Bibles, and it's always due to those Alexandrian manuscripts. Now, I've given you a general idea in the past when we're looking at the history of the kinds of things, the kinds of evidences that back up the majority texts versus the Alexandrian texts, the Antiochian text versus the Alexandrian text. And so now we're going to look at some of the specifics, so specific examples of these evidences. So let's look at this one. It's in the King James, Matthew 6:9 through 13. We read this: after this manner, therefore, pray ye, our Father which art in heaven. This is the Lord's Prayer. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. That last part I have highlighted in yellow there is left out of many of the modern Bible versions. And the reasons are because of the Sinaitic and Vaticanus manuscripts. Let's look at some of this evidence. Here's an example of the NIV. Here's the NIV. You can see that the Lord's Prayer is right there. It says, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one, which is not really what it says. It says from evil in general, which is a little different too. But you'll notice that it does not have the phrase, "For thine is the kingdom and power and glory forever, amen." They leave that out. That's not in most of your modern Bible versions. And here's some of the evidence. Now, this is the evidence for having that in the text. Okay, there are 1,416 manuscripts that include that passage, and really that's whenever we say there's over 5,000 manuscripts, we don't say that all those 5,000 manuscripts are include the whole Bible. Sometimes it's just portions of John. Sometimes it's just portions of a letter from Paul or something. So there's only a little over 1,400 manuscripts that could have this verse. There are copies of that passage that would have that passage in it. And out of them, 1,416 manuscripts have it in it. The Peshitta is actually a version. It's a Syrian version, another translation of the Greek, and it has it in there. And it was translated in the 300s. Okay, here's what the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus supporters say about this passage and others. They say that the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus are the oldest manuscripts, and as a result, since they're oldest, we go by them. And if it doesn't have it in those manuscripts, then we don't believe it was in the original writings that were originally written. We think that it was added later after those manuscripts. We think that passage or those verses were added later on. Here's the problem with that. Look at this Peshitta, for example. That part of that verse is in the Peshitta, and it was done at the same time. In 300s AD, the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus manuscripts, they say, were done in 350 AD. So the Peshitta has it in it, and it's just as old as the Alexandrian and Vaticanus manuscripts. But the Peshitta is not in Greek, and so that's why they don't consider it, even though it's But if they translated it into the Syrian language, where did they translate it from? They translated it from a Greek manuscript that had it in there. We just don't happen to have that Greek manuscript in our hands anymore. But it's also in the Gothic manuscript. It's in the Gothic translation, in the Palestinian Aramea, the Harkline Syriac, which was done in 616 AD, the Armenian, the Georgian, the Ethiopic, the Curetonian, the BL7, which is another manuscript codex. This is a book, Codex Babianus and Codex Brixianus, the Sahidic, all of these different versions have that verse in it. And many of these are just as old, or really close to just as old, as the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus manuscript. Look over on the right-hand side, you'll see these are actually letters from early church leaders that quoted this verse, that quoted this part of this verse. This very verse that they remove out of most of the Bible versions. Origen, now I don't like Origen. He's not a great character in Bible history, but he was alive in the first half of the 200s in Caesarea, and he quoted that verse. What was he quoting it from? He had to have been quoting it from something that had it in there. The Acts of Thomas had it in there in the 200s. Hilary of Poitiers had it in there in the mid 300s. Then you see Caesareus I can't pronounce all these names. Gregory of Nicaea had it in there. He quoted it. Cyril, Maximus, the Confessor, Tertullian, in the 200s, Tertullian was quoting this verse. Cyprian was quoting this verse in the 200s. Ambrose in the late 300s. Promedius, Augustine, Peter Chrysologus, and John Christoph. I can't pronounce the stuff. But you can see this is a list of actual quotes from ancient leaders in the church. And if you look down at the bottom there, you see the apostolic constitutions. This was a document that a lot of the early church fathers sat down and wrote. It's a list of things that we believe. It's like when you go to a church website and you see, what do we believe, and it gives you a list of those things. That's what this document is. And in 380, they quoted that verse. They had that verse in there. This verse that we're talking about, the Didache, it was called a creedal statement by the early apostles. Some of the apostles actually helped to write this, they believe. The Didache was in the early 100s, in the early 100s, the Didache copies that we have that verse in there. So all of this evidence is for having that part of that verse in the Lord's Prayer. You want to see the evidence against it? 14 manuscripts that are Alexandrian, which include the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus that were supposedly written in 350 AD. Most of the old Latin copies don't have it in there, and there's some Middle Egyptian copies that don't have it in there, and that's it. That's the evidence against. That's the reason why they take it. Now, I'll tell you this: if it didn't have 14 manuscripts, and if it didn't have the Vaticanus, and it didn't have the most old Latin copies or the Middle Egyptian, if it was only left out by the Sinaiticus, they would still most likely leave it out of the verse, because the Sinaiticus is their favorite, and so they always go by it more than they do others. So let's look at another one real quick. In Matthew 18:11, Jesus says, "For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost." That's an important verse, isn't it? Matthew 18:11, "For the Son of Man has come to save that which is lost." And here you have the New Living Translation. You can see there where I have the green mark. It's missing out of that verse. You got verse 10 and you got verse 12, but there is no verse 11. They leave that out of the verse. And if you'll notice down toward the bottom of the sheet there, you'll see some manuscripts add verse 21. Okay, and then a little bit later you say some manuscripts add verse 11, and I, the Son of Man, have come to save the lost. So they're saying some manuscripts. Let me give you those some manuscripts. Here's the some manuscripts that have it in there. 98% of all manuscripts that could have that verse in it has that verse in it, including, and you'll see the list, D, E, F. These are all labels given to specific manuscripts. So if you wanted to, you could get on the internet and you could look up the manuscript D, and you could find this verse in the manuscript D. And you can see all those all through the letters there, and then sigma and the phi and the omega. It is the reading of this reading is in the old Latin copies of A and AUR and the B and the D. These are all titles or labels for specific manuscripts that you can look up, and you can see that verse is in those manuscripts. It was in the Latin Vulgate. It was in the Peshitta. It was in the Curchonian, the Herculean, the Coptic, the Armenian, the Georgian, the Ethiopic. Hilary, Augustine, Peter, John, and Promadius, all of those people quoted this verse in their writings. They quoted this verse in their writings, and it's in the Diatessaron, which is another. It's similar to the Didache. It's a list of things that they believed in the 160 to 175 AD. Now remember, the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, they say, was most likely copied in 350 AD. So this is almost 200 years earlier. The Diatessaron is almost 200 years earlier than the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And this verse is in the Diatessaron. Where did it come from if they only made it up after the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus was copied from? So this is the some manuscripts add this verse. Here's the ones that leave it out: the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus. That's all the evidence they have against that verse is the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus. So they leave it out. So you're starting to see the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus manuscripts are the heavy hitters. If something is different between them and any other manuscript, they go by the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, generally speaking. Not always, but most of the time. Here you have the RSV, and you can see there that verse 13 is marked and verse 15 is marked, but Matthew 23:14 is gone out of the RSV. It's missing. And the reason they say is because it's not in the Sinaiticus manuscripts or the Vaticanus manuscript, which says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses and for pretense make long prayer. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation." That verse is not supposed to be in our Bibles according to them. Here's the evidence for that verse. Almost all manuscripts have it in there. I couldn't find a percentage, but most of them do, including these unsealed copies. Notice it says unsealed copies. That's the EFG. Unsealed copies, manuscripts, old Greek manuscripts come in either uncials or minuscules. Uncials are all capital letters, and minuscules are all lowercase letters. The uncials are less common. They're a lot more rare to find the unsealed manuscripts, and they're usually much older. And so all of these unsealed manuscripts that we have listed here, the Gamma, Delta, pi, sigma, and omega, and all those letters. Those are all specific manuscripts that include this verse. Okay, the old Latin copies, and you can see the ones that are listed there: the Syriac, Peshitta, the Curtonian, the Palestinian, the Coptic, Armenian, Ethiopic. The Ante-Nicene Fathers quoted this verse. The Diatessaron, the 160 to 175 AD, and there's two different ones. One from Tatian, and it also includes it. The Nicene and the Post-Nicene Fathers all quote this. Well, not all of them, but many of them do. And then the Chrysostom and the Homily LXX. That's called the LXX is called the Septuagint. It's a Greek translation that's different. But the homily that puts the Greek and the Hebrew next to one another from the Old Testament, and it includes some of the New Testament passages, is from 347, 407 AD. So right around the same time that the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus were being copied, if they're correct about the dates, which I'm not always sure about that, but even if they are, it's from the same time period. But this is the evidence for that verse. Here's the evidence against it. The Vaticanus and Sinaiticus don't have it in there, so they remove it. And I promise you can look this up. This is the case. And almost every time, if you look at these versions that don't include these verses, they'll say some manuscripts add this, giving you the idea that they were added and they didn't really belong there. Here's another example. You see Mark 11:26. I've marked up there with the green on the reverse side of the paper. The verse 26 is not there. They remove it out of the ESV. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses. That's what King James says. So that's an important verse. I've done a lot of studying on that verse. But according to the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, doesn't belong. Here's the evidence for it: the Codex Visa, the Codex Argentinus, Old Latin, the Jerome's Latin Vulgate in 383, Syriac Peshitta, the Gothic, the Hymnal, the Parablepsis, I don't know how to pronounce that. Cyprian in 249 quoted this verse verbatim, word for word, exactly the same. He quoted this verse in 249 AD. So that's pretty strong. I mean, how did he quote it if it wasn't in a manuscript somewhere that he had in his hand? But they don't consider this because it's not a manuscript. It's just a quote from in a letter. Okay. Here's the evidence against it. Again, the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus don't include that verse. This one's interesting. I may have alluded to this before. In the New American Standard here, you see that I've got verse 51 marked there. In the King James, you'll notice Luke 24:51, and it came to pass while he blessed them, he was parted from them, and notice in the highlighted area there in yellow at the bottom, and carried up into heaven. That's the ascension of Jesus that's at the end of the Gospel of Luke. So who wrote Luke? Luke, right? Well, he also wrote Acts. And here you can see that in the New American Standard, that part of that verse is gone. It does not include and carried up into heaven. So here's the reason why they say, notice this time, it's not in the Sinaiticus, but it is in the Vaticanus. You find this part of this verse is in the Vaticanus, but they removed that because it's not in the Sinaiticus. Now, they will tell you that the Vaticanus was copied at about the same time as the Sinaiticus, but then they're also going to tell you that portion of the verse was not in the original writings of Luke. It couldn't have been because it's not in the Sinaiticus, is what they say. You see? But here in Luke, so in Luke, we have that added, but take a look at Acts 1. See, Luke also wrote Acts chapter 1. And it says this: the former treatise have I made, talking about the gospel of Luke, O Theophilus, of all that Jesus began to do and teach until the day he was taken up. Luke just told us in his second letter, the book of Acts, that his first letter ended with Jesus' ascension. Now, I don't even have to look at the manuscript evidence. I can just look right here at the writer's next letter. And the writer says that he ended his last letter with the ascension. But it's not in the Sinaiticus, and so they leave it out of the New American Standard. Now, here's the interesting part. This is the same New American Standard the exact same book that I just showed you. But notice the Acts 1 verse is there, and it says until the day when he was taken up. So get this, the people who did this New American Standard Version, they saw that the Sinaiticus did not include the last part, the carried up into heaven in Luke 20 in Luke 24 there. But so that, I'm sorry, Luke, they didn't say it at the end of Luke. But then whenever they came to Acts, whenever they came to Acts, it does say that, and they wrote it in and they put it in there, but they never put 2 and 2 together and realized, see, what this is people who have not studied their Bible. If they had studied this, if they had paid attention to what they were reading while they were translating it, they would have noticed that Luke tells them that verse belongs at the end of his gospel, and they wouldn't have had that problem. So here are some other instances, and now I want you to notice something. These are not all, by any means, these are not all of the differences between the omissions, but notice these are all gospel mentions: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There are a lot of other ones, but I only focus this time on the gospel omissions, and I'll tell you why in just a bit. But you'll notice here in Matthew 24:35, the Sinaiticus does not have that verse in it, but the Vaticanus does. But many of the modern versions leave that verse out, and they do the same thing with all these: Luke 10:32, Luke 17:35, John 9:38, 16:15, and 21:25. None of those are in the Sinaiticus manuscript, but they are in the Vaticanus manuscript. But they leave them out of most of the modern versions, or at least they'll put a bracket around it or something like that, and call into question whether or not that verse is supposed to really be in the Bible because it's not in the Sinaiticus. See, they love the Sinaiticus. It's their greatest, most wonderful friend. Matthew 12:47 is in the Sinaiticus, but it's not in the Vaticanus, and they oftentimes leave this one out too. Luke 23:17, Luke 23:34. They often leave these verses out of modern Bibles. Not all of them do. They wishy-wash. Sometimes it'll be in the NIV and it won't be in the New American Standard, or vice versa. This is just a general idea here. In Matthew 17:21, down through the end there of those that Mark verse, you see neither one of the Vaticanus or Sinaiticus has those in it, so they leave those out. And you can see the same thing. Now, notice at the bottom, Mark 16:9 through 20. That's the very end of the Gospel of Mark. And neither the Sinaiticus or the Vaticanus has that in it, so they leave it out. They don't actually leave it out usually. They'll put it in there, but they'll put brackets around it, and at the bottom of the page they'll say that, many later manuscripts add verses 9 through 20. They're afraid to take it out because it's so important. Because you see Mark 16 Mark 16 9 through 20 includes the passage where Jesus tells us to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That's part of that verse. That's part of that passage, and so they're afraid to take that out completely. But they do put it in there usually. But then they'll call it into question that it doesn't really belong in the Bible. But this is interesting. This is the reason why I only included gospel references here in these omissions, and that's because we always talk about the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus, but there is another one called the Alexandrinus, and it's also an Alexandrian manuscript. And they say that it was done in around 400 AD, about 50 years after the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Now, they lean on the Alexandrinus, but only when it's in the New Testament other than the Gospels, because the Gospels in the Alexandrinus read like the majority text. All those verses that are missing in the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus in the Gospels are in the Alexandrinus. And it's an Alexandrian manuscript. It came from Alexandria, Egypt. But it includes these verses that are missing in Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Most of them. I think there might be 2 of them that it doesn't have. But regardless, when it comes to the Alexandrinus, they ignore it completely when it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And they only use it when it's in the epistles and prophecy of John, Revelation, and so forth. They don't use it for the Gospels because the Gospels agree with the majority text, based like our King James is based on. So I have a question. This manuscript was put together in Alexandria, and it includes these verses that the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus do not have. where did it get? Where did those people in Alexandria, whoever copied that, whoever the person was that wrote this manuscript, it's a codex. It's in a book. It's not just little pieces or parts of a book. It's an entire codex bound book. And because it's bound, that means that the Alexandrian style manuscript readings that are in the rest of the New Testament and the majority text readings that are in the Gospels existed at the same time, because this was put together in the book in one piece. And so those two things existed at the same time. Yet the people who love the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus will tell you that those majority readings came about much later in late manuscripts, and those verses were added by later manuscripts. This is just a 50-year difference, if they have the dates right, which I don't completely agree with their dating methods, but regardless, if you want to give them that, if you say, well, that's okay, you can have that dating method thing. Well, 50 years from 2,000 years ago is nothing. A 50-year difference from one copy to another, there's not much. It's just like you've done it yesterday. I mean, there's not much difference whatsoever in a 50-year period when you're talking about ancient manuscripts. So you might as well say this was done about the same time. So I'm curious as to, I've never heard anybody give a good explanation why they don't lean on the Alexandrinus whenever they're using the Gospels, and it can only be because they have that idea that they don't want to use the majority text readings. So now we're going to look just a little bit at a couple of supposed errors in the King James Version, and you might have seen these before, and we're just going to look at this one first. In Acts chapter 12, verse 4, we have this rendering, and when he had apprehended him, this is when Herod had arrested Peter, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. The big problem is that word Easter. Excuse me. So the word translated Easter here is the word Pascha. It's a Greek word Pascha. It appears 29 times in the New Testament. 28 of those times it's rendered Passover. It's translated as Passover. But here in Acts 12:4, it's translated Easter. Now, in every modern translation that you're going to pull off the shelf, it will take out Easter and put in Passover. In fact, in some of the earlier translation work, for instance, when Tyndale did his version, his work, and he translated Acts 4, he translated it Passover as well. So why then did the King James translators change it to Easter? We'll show that in just a minute. Let's read the entire verse now, the entire passage from verse 1. Now, about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. He wanted to put this Christianity thing, out of business. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. So Herod is the one who killed James, John's brother, and that's just a terrible shame. They were the sons of thunder. So verse 3, and because he saw it pleased the Jews, so the Jews there refers to the Pharisees, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. So here are the arguments that the modern translators will use to say that shouldn't be Easter, it should be Passover. They'll say, Herod waited until Passover was over with because he wouldn't want to anger the Jews. He didn't want to get them upset by doing something during their holy, time of Passover. He didn't want them to upset them. And then they also say that Easter didn't even exist back then. But here's the thing: Easter did exist. Easter comes from an ancient pagan festival of Astarte, who is also known as Ishtar, which was pronounced almost like Easter. And this, she was also the goddess Isis from the Egyptian culture. She was a very, very, very well-known female deity. Easter, the celebration of this was held late in the month of April. It wasn't called April then, but in that same time, the beginning of spring, based on the position of the moon, which is how we date our Easter today. It was all about new beginnings. That's why it was done in springtime, because it's new life, reproduction. They would have sunrise services. And in fact, here's an example of a sunrise service in the Bible dealing with her. And if you go back and read the entire passage, you'll see for sure this is what's going on. Ezekiel 8:16. And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord. They've turned their back on the temple of God, and their faces are toward the east, and they worship the sun toward the east. When do you worship the sun toward the east? Sunrise. That's if you're looking to the sun and it's in the east, it's at the sunrise. It's at the beginning of the day, because it sets in the west. So this festival that they would put on, it also involved a celebration of reproduction. And so their symbols were the rabbit, which I can tell you for sure, rabbits, they reproduce very fast, and the egg. Those are symbols of reproduction. Astarte, the female deity, is also known in the Bible as the Queen of Heaven. When you hear that phrase, the Queen of Heaven, in the Bible talking about this deity, this other god, it was this woman. It was this female deity. So Easter did exist in Herod's day. It might not have been called Easter, but that's what we know it as. So look at this though. Jesus was crucified at Passover. John 19:14. See, they say that the reason why Herod was waiting until after Passover was because he didn't want to anger the Jews. But look at John 19:14, and it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king!" But they cried out, "Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate saith to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So the chief priests, Pharisees themselves, wanted Jesus killed during Passover. So why would Herod be worried about killing Peter during Passover? That next year. So that's not a legitimate reason to say that Herod was wanting to wait until Passover so he wouldn't anger the Jews. The Jews liked it. They wanted the Christianity to be squashed. Now, both the Jewish Passover and the pagan Easter celebration were held about the same time. So let's look and see in Numbers. This is talking about Passover here in Numbers 28:16-18. And in the 14th day of the first month is the Passover of the Lord. That's around April 14th or so, which is they don't call it that. They call it Abib, I think, or they called it Abib back then, and not April. Verse 17. And in the 15th day of this month is the feast. 7 days shall unleavened bread be eaten. In the first day shall be an holy convocation. Ye shall do no manner of servile work therein. So Passover, the actual Passover, is on the 14th day of that month. The days of unleavened bread was on the 15th to the 21st day, the 7 days after Passover. And why is that important? Because our text that we're dealing with, this gives us an answer to our question, whether it should be Passover or Easter. Let's read it again. Acts 12:1. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it please the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Notice the parentheses. Then were the days of unleavened bread. So when was Peter arrested? He was arrested during the days of unleavened bread, which is between the 15th and the 21st of the month. Now, we don't know which day during the days of unleavened bread. It might have been the 16th, might have been the 17th, but we do know this. It was after the 14th, right? It had to have been after the 14th because the 14th was Passover. So if he arrested Peter during the days of unleavened bread, he couldn't be waiting until after Passover to bring it before the people because the Passover had already passed. The Passover was was on one day. It was on the 14th. And then after that were the days of unleavened bread. And he arrested Peter during the days of unleavened bread. And if he arrested Peter during the days of unleavened bread, Passover was already over. And so he couldn't say that he was intending until after Passover to bring him before the people. So it has to be something else. The only other festival that we know of is Easter. And so I think that's the reason why the King James. Easter did exist. There was no reason to wait until after Passover. Herod was a pagan. He would likely celebrate Easter. So he's waiting. He's waiting not because he's afraid to, make the Jews angry. He's waiting until after Easter because he's involved in the celebration. Everything goes on during that time of the year. Herod could not have been waiting until after Passover because Passover had already passed. Every single modern version changes Easter to Passover, but it has to be Easter because the Passover was already over with. So he couldn't have been waiting until after Passover because it already passed. So let's look at another one, and then I'll finish up with this one. In the King James Bible, we read in Jonah 1:17, now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now, Jesus alludes to this event in Matthew 12:40. For he's telling, they wanted to see a sign. He said, I'm not going to give you a sign except for one other sign, and that's for as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay. Here's the big error that we're supposed to have in our King James Bible. A whale is not a fish, and a fish is not a whale. That's a contradiction. So in other words, we have a contradiction in our King James Bible because in the Old Testament it says fish, and the New Testament says whale. All right. And for that reason, every modern version changes whale to fish. You can see even here the New King James says, for Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, is what it says. So everybody changes it to fish because they don't want there to be a contradiction in the Bible. Here's the thing, though: the Greek word that was used in Matthew 12:40 that Jesus says is the Greek word ketos, and it's only used once in the Bible, only one time. Now, the study of whales today is called ketology. And that word comes from the Greek word ketos. So Jesus said whale. He did not say fish. He said whale. He was specifically speaking of a particular type of animal, and he said whale. Though ketos is only used once in the Bible, ichthus is used 20 times. Ichthus is the word that means fish. And the word ichthus, is used all those times when it says that Jesus found the coin in the fish's mouth. That's the word ichthus. When he was cooking fish on the coals, that's the word ichthus. Whenever they pulled the great amount of fish that almost sank the boat, and the net was full with the fish, that's the word ichthus. Ichthus there's fish all over the Bible. It's a very fishy book, but it's fishes all over the place, and it's always the word ichthus, except for that one time when Jesus used the word whale, used the word ketos. Here's the thing. Here's the reason why this is not a contradiction. The Bible was written many years ago, but the classifications of mammals versus fish was only invented in the 18th century by Carolus Linnaeus. Carolus Linnaeus. He's the one who decided that because whales have hair and they give live birth and they breathe air, they're called mammals. Just like the cow that's walking around on the earth, on the land, is a mammal. And now I'm fine with that classification. It does scientifically show some difference, but God never classified his animals that way. And whenever God created the earth, he created land animals and he created sea animals. And up until the 18th century, if something was swimming in the sea, it was called a fish. A whale was just a specific type of fish. Okay. Now we know today that's not what we call it, but that's what it was called in that day. So shouldn't we change the whale to fish so that it doesn't, so it's more modern and it doesn't contradict with? Well, here's the reason it matters though. Jesus named the specific type of fish. He said whale. He didn't say fish. He said whale. Now that's a specific type of fish, but the book of Jonah didn't name the specific type of fish. According to Jonah, it could have been a shark. It could have been a giant catfish. It could have been some kind of giant tuna. I mean, it could have been. And it says that he prepared the great fish. So it could have just been a unique type of fish that was never even created before. It could have been something totally different from anything else. But Jesus called it a whale specifically. So the only way that somebody could know what type of fish it was is if he'd been there. because Jonah didn't put it down what kind of fish it was. He just said it's a great fish. Right? So changing whale to fish in Matthew 12:40, it takes away an example of Jesus's extra knowledge of historical events, because Jesus was there. If Jesus is God, he was there. He saw what type of fish it was. He created it. He brought forth that particular whale to swallow up Jonah. So we know it was a whale because Jesus said it was a whale. And we know that if you change it to fish in order to fit our modern classification methods, then you're taking away something that God has meant for us to have, namely the fact that Jesus understood things that were not necessarily written in the Bible. You remember when Jesus was in the temple when he was 12 years old, and they're astonished at his understanding. They're astonished at his understanding because he knows things that they don't know because he's God. He understands the Bible more than they do because he's God. And Jesus said well in Matthew 12:40, and he knows the Bible better than we do. And so we ought to stick with well rather than try to change it to fish and take away his understanding. And so that's the end of today. Right.
Yep.
I hope that was understandable. I feel like almost like I went a little bit too fast with it, but I wasn't as interested in trying to get you to understand all those different evidences. But just wanted you to see that when it comes to that Sinaiticus and Vaticanus manuscript, they lean on it to the exclusion of all of the other evidence. And we can say that, but when you actually see the list of evidence, you can tell that they're really ignoring a lot of stuff, and they do it because they consider that Sinaiticus manuscript. And I'll tell you this too, and I may go into this next time, but it almost sounds like a conspiracy theory, I admit, but the more you look into it, the more it's very possible that Sinaiticus manuscript is a forgery. It is possible that Sinaiticus manuscript is a forgery, and of course they won't. The only way you could tell for sure would be if they would allow you to chemically test some of those pages to see if it was a forgery, but they've not allowed that to happen. So.
Right. We'll dismiss the service and then we'll go into our prayer request time. So let's be dismissed. Lord, thank you for the time we had together. Thank you for this teaching today. And thank you for all those that were here. And thank you for Brother Goins and the time he's put in study and taking time to share everything with us. And Lord, I ask that you'll go with us during our time of prayer and be with us all throughout the remainder of the week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.